They say blood is thicker than water, but for Lydia, she never had the chance to prove this saying wrong. In a twist of fate, her own family was brutally murdered by her own brother. The story goes that it was done coldly and without mercy. But this is still all alleged. The Thompson family has been missing for nearly 30 years now, and the reason behind their disappearance remains a complete mystery. What makes it even stranger is that this case barely made headlines, and there's been almost no coverage over the years. The surviving relatives are left in a haunting silence, with no answers and little hope that they'll ever find any. But we're not letting this case go cold. We're about to dissect every clue, every suspect, and every twisted motive in a hunt to uncover what truly happened to the Thompsons. Starting with the person who everyone believed had a hand in the tragedy, Lydia's brother, Kenneth White. He was the only suspect in this case, but despite all the theories and suspicions, there was no hard evidence linking him to the crime. With no proof, he was never charged. But before we get into the details of his involvement, let's take a step back and really get to know the family. Now, Lydia White was married to Everett Thompson. In 1996, Everett was 40 years old, while Lydia was 43. Together they had two young sons, Everett Jr., who was 11, and Andrew, who was 8. The Thompson family lived in the Chatham neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, Illinois. It was a close-knit working-class area where everyone seemed to know each other. Everett and Lydia had been married for quite some time. They got married in 1982 after Everett moved to Chicago to work at one of the nearby steel mills. Originally from Philadelphia, Everett kept in touch with his parents back home, even after settling in Chicago. As you can see, he was a family man through and through. In a bold move, Everett and Lydia decided to open their own restaurant, Eat & Co., which was named after Everett's initials, E8. Everett was the head cook, and cooking wasn't just a job for him, it was his passion. He loved being in the kitchen, experimenting with new dishes and bringing people together through food. Lydia, on the other hand, inherited the family home in Chatham after her parents passed away. She owned a third of the property, sharing it with her two siblings, Kenneth and Phyllis. This home, full of memories, had been in the family for years, and everything seemed to be falling into place for the Thompsons. They were a hard-working family, chasing their dreams together. But then, in February of 1996, just a few months before the Thompson family disappeared, Lydia's brother Kenneth was released from prison. He had served time for a range of crimes, including sexual assault and kidnapping. After his release, he decided to move in with Lydia and her family at the house their parents had left to them. Remember, the house was shared between Lydia, her siblings Phyllis, and Kenneth. So things quickly got tense. Kenneth felt like the house was his by right and was upset that he had to share it with Lydia and her family. Meanwhile, Everett's side of the family saw Kenneth as a free-living guest who was overstaying his welcome. The tension was thick, and soon constant arguments started breaking out. The arguments were so intense that things started to spiral out of control. It got so bad that Kenneth allegedly chased Lydia around the house with an axe. And it wasn't just empty threats. In fact, on July 3, 1996, Lydia was desperate enough to call the police. She told them that her brother was after her with an axe, threatening her life. It was a scary situation, and you can imagine how terrifying it must have been for Lydia. However, when the police arrived, they found the situation had calmed down. According to the police, it wasn't as chaotic as it had been when Lydia made the call. Despite the severity of the threat, no arrests were made. The police did a quick sweep of the house, but everything seemed in order. Nothing was broken, no visible signs of damage, and no immediate danger seemed present. So they left, thinking it was just a family dispute that would blow over. Now, if you were thinking clearly, this would have been a huge red flag. Even without considering Kenneth's past, which included serious crimes that had landed him in prison before, this was a major warning sign. But since Kenneth was Lydia's brother, she probably didn't want to believe that he could truly be a threat. She probably thought, he's family, he wouldn't really hurt me. She probably thought, he's family, he wouldn't really hurt me. But little did she know, Kenneth's mind was much more twisted than she realized. Just 2 days later, on July 5th, 1996, things took another turn for the worse. Everett was at work, running his restaurant, Eat & Co. He was chatting on the phone with his father, Herman Thompson, who was asking when the family would be taking a vacation to visit him. Herman, who lived in Philadelphia, was eager to see his grandkids and wanted to know when Everett would bring the family out. Everett promised his dad that they'd visit as soon as he could take some time off work. It was a normal conversation, filled with the usual family chatter. But then, right in the middle of that phone call, Everett got another call, this time from Lydia. When he picked up, he could immediately tell something was wrong. Lydia was frantic, her voice shaking as she explained what was happening at home, and according to her, Kenneth was at it again. He was chasing her around with an axe, just like before. What's even more terrifying is that she was at home alone with the two boys. According to Herman, as soon as he hears what's happening, Everett immediately jumps back on the phone and says, "I gotta go home right away, Dad. Lydia's brother is chasing her around the house with an axe. She's locked herself in the bedroom and called me to come home. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every day, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot." Going back to the story, Everett hangs up with his dad and tells the restaurant manager that he has to leave to go home. Employees at the restaurant see Everett rush out, jumping into the family van. And that's the last time anyone sees or hears from him. But here's where things get really strange. About 2 hours after Everett leaves, Kenneth shows up at the restaurant, driving the family van. He walks in and tells the manager that Everett had been arrested after a car accident. The manager notices something odd, though. Kenneth is wearing white shoes, and there's something strange on them, like stains. It's a detail that will haunt the case later. Over the next several days, Herman repeatedly tries to get in touch with his son. He calls the family home, he calls the restaurant, but nobody has heard from Everett, Lydia, or the kids. It's like they've just vanished into thin air. Herman grows increasingly worried and frustrated, but no one can tell him where his son or the rest of the family is. Finally, on July 17th, 1996, 12 days after that frantic phone call with Everett, Herman calls the Chicago police. And when the police arrived at the Thompson family home, the only person they found was Kenneth. He was the one to tell them that the family had gone on vacation, either to Pennsylvania or Minnesota. According to Kenneth, they drove the family van there, which coincidentally was also missing. At first, the police didn't question his story too much. They took him at his word and left, assuming everything was fine. That things didn't stay fine for long. As the days went on, Kenneth's story kept changing. He first told people that the family had driven to Philadelphia. Then, he switched it up and said they had caught a bus to Minnesota. Later, he even told some folks that the family had flown to Hawaii. The inconsistencies were piling up, and it was becoming harder to ignore that something wasn't right. Now, here's the part that really raised the eyebrows. The police never seemed to make the connection, or at least they didn't act on it. As you can remember, just a few days before all this, Lydia had called the cops in a panic, claiming that Kenneth had chased her around the house with an axe. Now, just a few days later, the family's missing, and Kenneth's story keeps shifting. It's a huge red flag, but the police didn't seem to be connecting the dots. They didn't even seem to be suspicious of Kenneth, which is baffling. Things get even stranger when, at some point, Kenneth is pulled over while driving the very same family van he had claimed was with the rest of the family on vacation. This totally contradicted his previous claims that the family had driven or flown to different locations. It should have been a huge warning sign, yet the police still didn't put two and two together. Meanwhile, back in Philadelphia, Everett's parents, Herman and Erling Thompson, were getting more and more worried. They couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened. They kept trying to reach their son, but they couldn't get in touch with him. So, in late July of 1996, they made the decision to drive to Chicago and search for their son and his family themselves. Their first stop was the restaurant where Everett had worked, Eat & Co. They spoke with the employees and learned that Everett had never returned after that frantic phone call from Lydia. The manager also told them about Kenneth showing up at the restaurant in the family van and about the blood on his shoes. That was the moment the alarm bells went off. Herman and Erling were no longer just worried, they were scared. They immediately called the police, urging them to investigate Kenneth further. This was the moment when the police began to dig deeper and uncovered that there was no record of an automobile accident or any arrest involving Everett, which Kenneth had previously claimed. As the investigation continued, the police also learned that Kenneth had sold the family van to a scrapyard, where it was immediately crushed. This meant that any potential evidence the vehicle might have held was lost forever. But the drama didn't stop there. Kenneth had gone even further when he forged his sister's signature to sell the family home, the one that they had all inherited. By the time the police became aware of this illegal sale, the new owners had already taken possession of the house and completely gutted its interior, which basically means that any evidence of foul play that might have been in the house was now lost. However, the investigation took a bizarre turn when the inspector's notes from before the house sale went through revealed something unsettling. The note said that the kitchen floor had been completely ripped out, and even more strangely, both the bathtub and toilet had been painted red. But when police had visited the house earlier, on July 3rd, right after Lydia's frantic call about Kenneth chasing her with an axe, the officers reported that the kitchen floor was intact, and there were no signs of red bathroom fixtures. This meant that all of the changes, like the ripped floor and the red bathroom fixtures, had been made after July 3rd, and likely after the Thompsons had gone missing. With all of this disturbing new evidence, Kenneth remained the prime suspect in the mysterious disappearance of the Thompsons. But despite all the strange behavior, such as selling the family van, forging his sister's signature to sell the house, the police still didn't make an arrest. It was as if they were waiting for something more, something concrete. And then an entire year passed. Fast forward to July 14, 1997, exactly 1 year after the Thompsons had vanished without a trace. Finally, the police and FBI decided it was time to take action. They searched the trailer where Kenneth had been living in Gary, Indiana, a place about an hour and 15 minutes away from Chicago. The search was intense, with cadaver dogs brought in to sniff out anything that could link Kenneth to the crime. What they uncovered was chilling. Men's gym shorts and a boy's sock, both soaked in blood. This discovery sent shivers down the spine, but shockingly, no arrest was made at that time. And to this day, there's no report explaining whose blood was found on those items or what connection they had to the case. It wasn't until later, in November of 1997, that Kenneth was finally arrested. But it wasn't for the disappearance of the Thompsons. Instead, the charges had nothing to do with the family at all. Kenneth was arrested for violating his probation, specifically for failing to register as a sex offender. Then came just a month later, in December of 1997. The FBI had gathered more evidence, and Kenneth was arrested once again, this time for forging Lydia's signature on a check for $3,272. That was definitely a serious crime. But it still wasn't enough to answer the most important question. Where were the Thompsons? While Kenneth was being held at the Federal Metropolitan Correctional Center in downtown Chicago, he tragically took his own life. There was no note left behind, and the cause of death was ruled as self-inflicted. The lieutenant later spoke about the case, saying, "We believe he had a lot to do with their disappearance. Now that he is dead, it is our hope that people who knew him, both in prison and on the outside, will come forward with answers." He continued, "If there was foul play, and we think there was, it happened on July 4th or 6th, 1996. No one saw the Thompson family after that time, and Kenneth was seen driving the Thompson van soon after that weekend. The enormity of an entire family of 4 people missing under such dreadful circumstances demands a continued police presence and review. Despite the lieutenant's statement, it seems like there hasn't been much progress after Kenneth's death. No major updates from the Chicago police or the FBI have been reported, and it doesn't appear that further searches have been conducted to recover the bodies of the Thompson family. What's particularly telling is that none of the Thompsons' social security numbers have been used since they disappeared. Also, Everett and Lydia's credit and bank cards haven't been touched, except for the times Kenneth tried to forge checks in Lydia's name. The whole situation surrounding the disappearance of the Thompson family is absolutely mind-blowing. It's shocking how little information has been released, especially given the gravity of the case. When the family first went missing, you'd expect a huge media frenzy, national attention, and all sorts of investigations to unfold, but that's not what happened. The case completely flew under the radar, and it wasn't until after Kenneth's death that people started revisiting the case. Looking back, there was no major search or even a widespread effort to find them. No team of investigators scouring the area, just radio silence. As if that wasn't strange enough, an unnamed police officer later reported that after all, the family members had gone missing, and Kenneth had committed self-harm. It seemed that the Thompsons, except for Everett, might have used an underground structure to escape from Kenneth. According to this report, the family had fled because they were terrified of Kenneth, who had allegedly been threatening them with an axe. The theory is that they hid out underground to avoid further harm. Now, this adds a whole new layer to the mystery. Neighbors reported seeing Everett return to the house several times during the next 12 days after the family's disappearance. He came back at strange hours, and his behavior was reportedly odd. One elderly neighbor, a woman named Marie, even spoke to him one night. He allegedly told her that he was searching for his family in the bunker under the house. Marie, thinking he was simply suffering from the grief of losing his loved ones, didn't think much of it at the time. It wasn't until late in 1997 that she finally spoke out, revealing what she'd heard to a journalist and at least 2 police officers. Other neighbors also reported seeing Everett bringing things in and out of the house at strange hours, further adding to the mystery. However, there doesn't seem to be any solid evidence to back up these claims, and no one else has been able to confirm the story. What makes things even more eerie is that the underground structure, the one supposedly used by the family to hide, has not been fully mapped or searched. As of now, it remains an unexplored part of the case. There's also a theory that there's no doubt Kenneth killed the entire family. He had nearly 2 weeks to get rid of the bodies, which some people believe he may have done in a horrific way. One theory is that he dismembered them in the bathtub, especially since the bathtub was later found painted red, which could have been an attempt to hide evidence of what happened. The theory continues, speculating that Kenneth might have thrown the body parts into nearby lakes, fed them to alligators, or even dumped them in old wells. With the kind of disturbing behavior Kenneth displayed, it's not too far-fetched to think he might have gone to extreme lengths to destroy any evidence. Some even wonder if he could have been twisted enough to eat the body parts, a thought that's hard to shake off once you consider his apparent lack of remorse. The fact that he took his own life only adds to the suspicion. His death seems like a reflection of the guilt he carried, though it also leaves the case with more unanswered questions than ever. Unfortunately, with everything that's happened, it seems highly unlikely that any remains will ever be found. The search for answers might just end here, with the gruesome possibility that those answers are buried forever, lost in the trail of blood and secrets that Kenneth took to his grave. But what do you think? Do you believe Kenneth was responsible for the family's disappearance and that his death was driven by guilt? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear what you think. If you like the way we create these videos and you want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.